Hi, everyone who's here already. We'll get going in a minute or two. Let people join.
Allison, I'm back. Is it all good on your end?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
Awesome.
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen so we all have something to look at. Let's see. There we go. Can folks see that okay? I go into full screen mode.
Are you going to put it up on here?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to pull it up on here.
So I guess, Shane, if you want to get things going, because we have a packed schedule, people can continue to come in as they are.
Sounds good. Thank you, Allison. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining tonight for this conversation about the Flood Safety Act and beyond. This is a talk about statewide and local efforts to address flooding in the Winooski Watershed. My name is Shane Jakewith. I'm the Watershed Restoration Program Manager for the Nature Conservancy, and I'm joined by my colleague Allison Spazek from the Lake Champlain Sea Grant Program. Allison, probably a good time for you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Allison. I work for Lake Champlain Sea Grant, like Shane said, and we're really thankful for all of you who are joining us tonight.
Okay, thanks, Allison. So this webinar is part of a series of regional webinars that the Nature Conservancy, the Lake Champlain Sea Grant, and the Department of Environmental Conservation are hosting around the state to provide information on the state's recently passed Flood Safety Act, as well as local efforts to improve flood resilience and water quality. So we're fortunate enough to be joined tonight by a number of local organizations that work in the Winooski Watershed, including the Friends of the Mad River, the Friends of the Winooski River, the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District, the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, and the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. And at this point, Allison is going to walk us through some pro tips for using Teams to participate in the webinar. Allison?
Yeah, thanks, Shane. So we are using Teams for this meeting tonight. Maybe most of you have used Teams before, but a few reminders that we will ask that you just click that mic button to keep yourself on mute, just to minimize background noise during the first part of tonight, but then you can come off mute to ask questions at the end. When we do some Q&A at the end, feel free to use the raise hand feature to let us know that you have a question. That can help sometimes. But feel free to use the chat throughout this meeting for questions and comments as we go. That's totally fine. And we are going to record this meeting to share out with everybody that registered afterwards, because we know that sometimes there's conflicts and people can't attend even if they wanted to. So those are the reminders. The agenda for tonight, we've got a pretty full schedule. So shortly we're going to hear from our colleagues at the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation that are joining us tonight. And then the first half of this meeting is largely going to be talking about statewide efforts to address flooding. This is through the Flood Safety Act, and so we'll spend some time talking about that. And then the second half of tonight, we're going to hear from local organizations in the Winooski Watershed who are doing important on-the-ground work to help improve flood resilience and water quality, and to help our municipalities and communities. And so we're going to hear from the Friends of the Winooski River, then the Friends of the Mad River, the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District, Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, and Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. And we should have some time for questions at the end. So that is our agenda. At this time, I think we have Rose joining us tonight, who's going to introduce herself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Rose Watts, and I am a river corridor and floodplain manager. And the map of floodplain managers is right there in front of the screen. So we currently have 5 different regional floodplain managers by county. And we also have river scientists on our team, as well as a few outreach and education and support folks. So all of us are here to support municipalities, a lot of other partners in terms of a few different things. My role is regulatory and support with regulatory work. So working with municipalities on local flood hazard permitting and bylaws, and then also working with Act 250 and our statewide flood hazard and river corridor permit, which we will get into more. And then Ned and Tessa and Asa work a little bit more with outreach and education and supporting the new mapping rollouts from FEMA, the new statewide rule. And then we have a science team. And I believe that right now the river scientist in this region is Stacy, but their regions will be shifting a little bit pretty soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Rose. And Rose will be very helpful during our Q&A at the end too, if there's specific questions around flood maps and things like that. So to kick things off, we're going to start by talking about the Flood Safety Act. This particular education and outreach effort is a collaboration between the Nature Conservancy, Lake Champlain Sea Grant, and the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. And so our goal for tonight is to provide you all with some background and details and timeline all around the Flood Safety Act, as well as answer your questions about what these changes are going to mean for your town and your community. So to get things going, we're going to be spending a lot of tonight talking about river corridors. And so we thought it would be useful to define what we mean by that right at the beginning. And so in Vermont, the river corridors are the mapped areas on either side of the river where we expect the channel to adjust over time. Many of you are probably familiar with the fact that rivers move and change shape over time in response to changes in water flow and sediments and human alteration. And so we know that this is a natural process, and protecting the areas on either side of the river where we know these movements are likely to occur will allow the river to find its slowest and least erosive path down the valley. So we're going to continue building upon this concept, but to go back to the Flood Safety Act and give you all a little background, this Act 121 was passed in 2024 after the historic flooding that our state experienced in 2023. And so I like to show this rainfall total map from that July 10th and 11th, 2023 storm, because it really shows that extreme precipitation and the flooding that eventually follows, it doesn't stick to town or county boundaries. It's really more of a watershed-wide phenomenon. And so because a lot of our regulations around flood hazards are at the municipal level, there can be changes in differences in how each community handles its river regulations and floodplains. And so we know that the most successful flood mitigation efforts are often those that take a watershed-wide approach. And so because the Flood Safety Act makes changes at the statewide level, it also in effect takes a watershed-wide approach by making sure that all towns upstream and downstream of the same river system have the same kind of protections in place that will hopefully make all of our communities safer in the future. So the Flood Safety Act aims to mitigate flood risk in multiple ways. First, it establishes state regulation of proposed development in river corridors. So we're going to be spending most of our time talking about that tonight. But it also creates statewide minimum standards for development in National Flood Insurance Program enrolled towns. It also strengthens dam safety through increased oversight and maintenance requirements. And then finally, it aims to increase floodwater storage in wetlands by establishing a net gain wetland rule. And so we're happy to answer questions at the end out of that are about any of these four kind of buckets that the Flood Safety Act aims to do, but we will be spending most of our time tonight talking about the river corridors piece. So the timeline for when we expect changes to take place, the biggest I guess date to be aware of on this timeline here is that we expect the administration of the new rules around river corridors to begin in January 1st of 2028. And there's a variety of other things that are set to take place before that happens. And Shane is going to be talking a little bit more about that. But the act itself also mandates a 2-year education and outreach effort. And so part of what we're doing tonight is to begin that effort to educate you all about what we expect to happen through this. So to get back up a little bit and provide some context for how we got to where we are today, this is a list of some of the large floods that our state has experienced, dating all the way back to 1869. And you can see that for each of these events, the damages that have been caused by flooding have exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars that has been adjusted for inflation. And so we know flooding is costing us a lot. And we also know that it's quite frequent. So even in between those large and destructive floods that many of us have probably heard of, the state of Vermont experiences smaller, more regional flooding on a quite frequent basis. And so this map from Vermont DEC is just broadly defining areas of the greatest damage from flooding between 1973 and 2011. And what you'll see is that almost on a 1 to 2 year basis, somewhere in the state is experiencing the effects of flooding. And so this all culminates in the fact that flooding is the most common and costly recurring hazard in Vermont. Additionally, the Nature Conservancy has recently done an analysis that found that Vermont's average annual public flood damage costs are around $30 million per year. So when we talk about damage caused by flooding, it's important to distinguish between inundation-related damage and then damage that's caused by erosion. And so inundation flooding is often what we think of when we hear the word flooding. In Vermont, this most often happens when rivers rise above their banks and spill out onto adjacent areas that don't normally have water. So that's exemplified by that photo of Montpelier back in 2023. And so certainly inundation flooding is a huge concern for Vermont. But we also see a lot of damage from erosion, which is the wearing away or undermining of land next to rivers. And this causes a lot of damage to our roads and our culverts and bridges and any other kind of infrastructure or buildings that are next to rivers. And the state of Vermont has tallied up the damage caused by flooding over the years, and we found that over 75% of the monetary flooding damages are actually due to fluvial erosion in Vermont. And so in a lot of ways, this makes sense because repairing huge sections of roads that get washed out or bridges or buildings that get washed off their foundations is really, really expensive. And so this type of damage is costing us a lot as taxpayers and is quite impactful to our small town budgets. And then moving on to Shane, who's going to continue with some of our background information.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. So Allison just explained, that we have a long history of both large and small floods. Damages are extensive, as we all know. And she also explained that there's a difference between erosion hazards and inundation hazards. And so I'm going to take a few slides here to talk about how we have historically mitigated those hazards across Vermont and really around the globe. This is kind of the way that humanity has attempted to mitigate flood hazards. And that's largely been a command and control approach. Going back to European settlement times, we began straightening rivers and moving them to get them out of the way of other desired land uses, such as agriculture, transportation networks, residences and businesses, etc. So we've straightened rivers to get them out of the way. We have dredged those river channels to make them deeper in the hopes that they would contain all of the floodwaters and we would no longer experience that inundation damage that Allison mentioned. We then armored those banks to keep them where we wanted them, riprap and large boulders and sometimes even concrete. And we've also, along with the dredging to keep the water in the banks, we've bermed a lot of our rivers, using the materials that we take out of the rivers, placing it on the bank to add additional capacity to the channels to keep floodwaters out. What we have unfortunately learned is that this command and control approach, the straightening, the armoring, and the dredging, has not worked. And in fact, it's only made matters worse. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why that is. So let's jump into the practice of channel straightening to move the river out of the way of other land uses. So what is the problem with channel straightening? Why doesn't it work? So the answer to that begins with the fact that when we straighten rivers, if we look at the photo at the top, when we straighten a meandering channel, and the hypothetical straightened channel is represented by the solid blue line going from point A to point B. If we straighten that meandering channel, we really reduce the overall length of the channel. I think if you could imagine grabbing a hold of that point B location, and if you were able to pull that meandering river like it was a string, it would extend far beyond the edge of the slide, right? It's much longer than the straightened path that's represented by the solid blue line. So when you straighten a river, you make it shorter. And when you make a path shorter that's going down a slope, and this is shown in the plot in the bottom, you make that path steeper, right? So I think we can all recollect, hiking up a hill or skiing down a hill. If you're going straight, it's steeper. Going up, it's harder. Going down, it's faster. If you take the meandering path, it's a lot easier. It's a lot longer, a lot less steep than the straight path. So if we look at that on the plot, again, it just reemphasizes that the longer meandering river channel is flatter, it has a lower slope. And what's important about that is that the slope of a river channel, in combination with the depth of water in that channel, are those two factors, the slope of the channel and the depth of water in the channel, are the two primary factors in generating the erosive power of the channel. So when we straighten channels, we make them shorter, we make them steeper, and we make them more powerful, which results in more erosive energy, and that gets at that whole issue of erosion, fluvial erosion hazards that Allison mentioned. Okay, Allison, we can go to the next slide. So this slide gets at some of the issues around dredging of channels. And so this slide starts, the first panel at the top is where we want to start on this slide. Scenario is that, you have a house in the floodplain that regularly gets flooded. So if we move down to the second panel in the figure, it represents the idea, the common practice of dredging that channel to try to hold more of that water in the channel and keep it out of the basement and out of the house. So the issue here is that when we dig a deeper channel, we create a scenario in which we have we can have deeper water, right? Pretty straightforward. That's what we're trying to do. The problem with that is that the two primary parameters in generating the erosive energy of a stream or river are the depth of the flow and the slope of the channel. So we're increasing the depth of the flow, the potential depth of the flow. And again, when we do that, we make the flow more erosive. We get erosion of the bed of the channel and the toes of the banks. That's what those red dashed lines are trying to represent. And eventually the banks collapse and we lose whatever investments we have adjacent to the river channel. So that is the problem with dredging and why dredging has only made our problems worse. So if we think about what's happened over time, what's referred to as a channel evolution model, it becomes really helpful in helping us to understand that process. And this is pretty similar to the last slide I showed. Again, you have a house in the floodplain starting at the top. There's a broad floodplain on either side of the channel. And that floodplain is super important. I didn't get into this in the last slide. I probably should have. That floodplain is super important because it is the pressure relief valve of the river system. It's like the blow-off valve if you have a hydronic heating system in your house. If you have, we all own cars, the radiator, right, the cooling system in your car has a blow-off system. There's a tank that hot water can spill over into when it expands. So the floodplain is like the pressure relief valve of the system. When the water rises and it can easily spill out onto the floodplain, that floodplain, the large area of that floodplain provides space for the water to slow down and energy to be dissipated. And the depth of the channel and the amount of energy in the channel is governed in that manner. So if we move down to the second slide, or if we think back to the slide or the second panel in this image rather, what happens again, the homeowner gets tired of getting flooded. So in this scenario, they add berms to the river banks. And again, that increases the potential depth in the channel. So you have more energy in the channel. And what actually happens is that the channel starts to cut downward, same as I showed in the last slide. And in the third panel down, the channel starts to widen because the banks fail. Again, same as the last slide. And we go through this cycle, through this evolution process, and we get all the way down to the bottom panel in the image labeled as stage 5 there. And it looks a lot like it did at the top. Similar shape of the valley and the channel, where you have a small channel set with inside a wide valley. But as we go through that process, we lose a tremendous amount of land mass and we lose all of the investments that we have along the channel. So the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Rivers Program in the department has conducted assessments of 5,000 miles of river throughout the state. And for some context, there are approximately 23,000 miles of river in the state, so about 20%. And what they found is that 75% of those 5,000 miles are in these 3 stages, 2, 3, and 4 that I have highlighted on the figure there. These stages, again, they're really unstable. They're disconnected from their floodplain. They don't have that pressure relief valve, and the river is just ripe for massive erosion. So when we get the large volumes of water flowing through them, we see massive channel adjustment and erosion. And that is the major contributor to all of the erosion damage that we see throughout the state.
Okay, so in Vermont and around the United States, we've historically relied on the National Flood Insurance Program to help not only insure us against flood risk, but also mitigate that risk in some ways. And so communities choose to participate in this program, and they agree to regulate development in floodplains to a minimum standard set by FEMA. And so FEMA creates these flood maps where if you have a federally backed mortgage and you live in one of these designated flood zones, you're required to purchase flood insurance. But anyone living in any of these green communities can purchase flood insurance. And so looking at this map here of communities in Vermont that participate in the program, it looks like we're doing pretty good. It's all but around 20 communities. And so we might feel like, great, we're doing everything we can to mitigate against flood risks and protect our property in the event of future flooding. And so while this program is extremely important to our communities and our state as a whole, there are some drawbacks from only relying on the National Flood Insurance Program and the maps provided by FEMA to analyze our flood risk in the state. And so one of those drawbacks is just simply that many of our small streams don't have mapped flood hazard area. So we are a rural state. We are also sometimes called a headwater state. So a lot of our stream miles, Shane mentioned 23,000 around that stream miles in the state. A lot of those are those small tributaries that are up in the headwaters and our mountainsides and hills. And so they might look like they're pretty benign for most of the year, just a small trickle maybe sometimes, except maybe around now when we're getting a lot of snow melt. But they can be quite destructive. For example, this unnamed tributary in the White River caused a lot of damage to this road and probably surrounding infrastructure. And so one drawback is simply that we don't have flood hazard data for a lot of our stream miles in the state. Another drawback is just simply that the National Flood Insurance Program wasn't designed to address fluvial erosion hazards, which you'll remember do account for the majority of the costs incurred by flooding and damage from flooding in our state. And so you can have situations where there's properties that are not in the designated FEMA floodplain, and so they may not be fully aware of what kind of flood risks exist. However, if they are in the river corridor, that can give us a better idea of the full range of hazards that might be present for that particular property. So we're going to continue talking a little bit more about that. Back to Shane.
Thanks, Allison. So, we've kind of summarized that, we experienced lots of floods. Again, the majority of the damage, the great majority of the damage is in the form of erosion hazards. Our historic approach to mitigating those hazards has really only made things worse. And despite our solid participation in the NFIP program, which is really important, we are not protected from erosion hazards because the NFIP program just wasn't ever intended to do that. So what do we do? So this gets us back to the idea of the river corridor, as Allison presented earlier. The river corridor is that area in which we expect the river to move side to side. And if we can allow it to do that, it will achieve a more meandering, a longer path, right? That's a less erosive path. So if we can let it do that, find its meandering path, we can reduce the amount of erosive energy in the river, and we are keeping investments outside of that hazardous area. So we're limiting the opportunity for damage in that way. So how are river corridors mapped? It might seem really unlikely that we can understand where rivers are going to move over time, but there is a lot of science around this topic globally. And so what that science has told us generally is that rivers that can move around within what we refer to as a meander belt, that's a belt around the river or the corridor. A river that can move within a corridor that is approximately 6 times the width of the channel width. So if you have a river that's 10 feet wide, we'd be talking about a meander corridor or river corridor that's 60 feet wide. And so the way that these corridors are mapped have been mapped by the state of Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation is by first starting with drawing a meander center line. That's that dashed black line that just passes through all of the inflection points of the meandering river to create a straighter path. And then along that meander center line to sort of buffer out 3 times the width of the channel on either side. That's represented by those red arrows. So we achieve a meander belt that is 6 channel widths wide. And then on top of that, not shown in this figure, we wanted to keep it as simple as possible, but on top of that, there's an additional 50 feet on either side of the river just to allow for slopes to for slopes to become stable. And what I mean by that is like lie back and become lower slope. So if you have a vertical bank, it's going to erode over time and lay itself back. It also allows for riparian vegetation to grow, which also helps to stabilize those slopes. So that is how the river corridors have been mapped by the Department of Environmental Conservation. This slide shows both the river corridor as mapped by the Department of Environmental Conservation, or which is within the Agency of Natural Resources. So that's why it's labeled here as ANR River Corridor. Alongside or overlaid or underlaid by the FEMA flood hazard map, and that's shown in red. And that again is the map that is used by the National Flood Insurance Program. And so the flood hazard map, that shows where we expect water to flow out of the river during what we often commonly refer to as a 100-year flood. The better way to refer to that is a 1% chance flood, which means that on any given year, there's a 1% chance that the water will flood out into that area. So back to the point, the red map, the red polygon is the area that we expect that water to, where we expect that water to spread out during that flood event. And the yellow area is where we expect the river channel itself to actually move back and forth over time. And the point here is that, you know, we can use both of these hazard areas, these mapped hazard areas, to really provide much more comprehensive mitigation to flood hazards, which again include both the erosion hazards and the inundation hazards. Okay, so this image shows a hypothetical sort of a mock-up of what is referred to as infill, river corridor infill and redevelopment areas. So in developing the river corridor concept, the Vermont DEC long has acknowledged that, boy, you know, a lot of our villages and downtowns are along rivers. And in fact, it turns out that 84% of those downtowns are along rivers and within river corridors. And to completely, you know, or to not completely, but to significantly reduce development in those downtowns would really be counter to our long-standing approach of trying to create dense development patterns. So the legislature in passing the act or crafting the act, the Flood Safety Act, mandated that DEC map within the river corridor as it passes through downtowns and villages, those areas that we're already protecting because there are already existing developments there, and those areas are shown in orange in this hypothetical mock-up, that would, because of the virtue of being protected by, you know, benefiting from the protections we're already taking on, would be reasonably safe for additional buildings to be developed. So the DEC Rivers program is going to enter into a process of creating or doing the mapping for infill development within downtowns and villages. And again, those areas are shown in in orange. The black dots are existing buildings. The yellow is the river corridor as it passes through the downtown area, which is that area within the green outline. This slide just shows the jurisdictional footprint of the river corridor permitting program that will start up in January 1 of 2028. So the green is the river corridor around the river, shown in blue. And so where there are mapped river corridors is where the permitting program will apply. And there are mapped river corridors along rivers where those rivers drain more than 2 square miles of land area. And so this isn't a completely intuitive concept for most people, so I'm going to try to walk us through it. So the blue polygons show let's talk about the upper, or the red dot that's to the left, that's furthest to the left on the slide. So the blue polygon above that dot shows all of the land area that contributes water. It's kind of it's the bowl, right? It's the bowl that contributes water to that point. And that land area, we can measure that, right? Like we measure any land area. And it turns out, if we measure that land area, that it is exactly 2 square miles. So upstream of that point, you notice there's no river corridor. So development along those rivers upstream of that point would not have to be permitted under the Flood Safety Act. But as we move downstream of that red point, we then start to move into the sections of river that drain more than 2 square miles, and we therefore have a river corridor that's mapped along there. That is the area in which developments would need a permit from the agency beginning in January 1 of 2028. So a few considerations for municipalities around Act 121, and everybody really. If you want to view river corridor maps, you can go to the Agency of Natural Resources online atlas or the Flood Ready Atlas, and you can view the river corridors there. So you can check out, where they are in relation to your property, your house, or any other points of interest you might have. Permits, the second point, permits for new development and river corridors will be required starting in January 1 of 2028. The third point is that DEC has the option to delegate the authority to handle the permitting program to municipalities. So if a municipality wants to handle the permitting of development within river corridors, they can seek that authority from DEC. And there will be a process, I suspect, for that. There will probably be some criteria that the municipality will have to meet just to demonstrate it has the capacity to handle that permitting program. But DEC does have the ability to do that. The fourth point is that municipalities may regulate development along streams with watersheds smaller than 2 square miles. So in that previous slide, I just explained that the state will have jurisdiction on streams larger than 2 square miles. If a municipality decides they like the idea of river corridor protections and they see the benefit to them economically and from a public safety perspective, and they want to regulate the river corridors along the smaller streams, there's no reason they can't do that, and DEC can assist them with doing that. The fifth point's a little bit complicated. So we have this thing called ERAF in Vermont. It's the Emergency Relief Assistance Fund. And this fund, it provides money to municipalities to help them cover their cost share after a federally declared disaster. So after a disaster is declared, the feds will come in and they'll pay 75% of the recovery cost. Towns can benefit from the ERAF fund, which again kicks in some money to help them cover their share, the 25%. And so under the ERAF program, and it's one of the incentives one of the programs that the ERAF program would try to incentivize would be the adoption of river corridor protections, because for the last maybe 12 years, municipalities have had the option of adopting river corridor protections on their own. So those municipalities that had adopted river corridor protections would receive a greater share from the ERAF program. So I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, but I think it was like up to 17.5% of that 25% that they were responsible for would be provided by the ERAF program if they had river corridor protections in place. Now that every town in the state will essentially have river corridor protections because it's going to be administered by the state statewide, it's unsure what will happen to those incentives that those towns who have long had river corridor protections, what will happen to those incentives. That's all to be determined going forward. And with a couple slides left, we have on the Vermont's Flood Safety Act, you can find a whole bunch more information about the river corridor, the Flood Safety Act in general, and specifically river corridor protection component of the Flood Safety Act. The link is there. So if you want to look around some more, that's where you would do that. And finally, as we mentioned at the very beginning, this webinar is part of the 2-year outreach and education campaign that was required by the Act 121, or was required by the Flood Safety Act. And some of the wording that act, what the legislature wanted, one of the things that the legislature wanted out of the outreach and education campaign was public comment. So if you have public comment, if you have comment that you want to make on the Flood Safety Act, you can use this link here and provide those comments, and they will go directly to DEC, and DEC will include those comments in its first report to the legislature. So that's where you want to comment if you have comments. Alternatively, if you just have questions, you can certainly reach out to Allison or myself, and our contact information is there at the bottom.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. So that sums up kind of our whole statewide part of the evening, but we are fortunate to be joined by numerous local organizations who are going to talk a little bit about their work and the services they provide. And so first, we're going to hear from Michelle from the Friends of the Winooski River.
Thank you, Allison. All right. I'm Michelle Braun. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the Winooski River. Oh. Okay. So our watershed is over 1,000 square miles in the heart of Vermont, and our abundant water is at the heart of what makes us Vermont. Syrup, beer, fishing, skiing, you name it. So Friends of the Winooski River was founded more than 25 years ago by a group of volunteers who just cared about protecting our waters. And little did they know at that time how important their work would come to be in adapting to a more extreme climate. As you heard from Shane a moment ago, we have come to understand that supporting rivers' natural processes and restoring naturally functioning floodplains is a powerful piece of adapting to extreme climate conditions such as drought and flooding. This means that the work that we've been doing all along for decades, together with landowners and municipalities and other partners, is the foundation for helping our communities navigate and adapt. So we talked about floodplain reconnection, and that's an important project type. There are a few other kinds of projects with flood resilience benefits that I just want to touch on. Stormwater management projects that we do for water quality goals can also reduce flood flows and damage. A couple examples of those are our Hubbard Park sediment trap project, which prevents damage to the park roads and prevents sediment from being washed into the north branch of the Winooski during heavy rain events. And the Berrytown Recreation Area Bioretention Basin, which was built to intercept flow from the recreation area that was causing a huge gully, and the soil washing out of the gully was filling in a wetland that ought to be providing flood storage to protect Berry City. These are projects that we completed before the flood. You see in this picture, the photo on the right is after the flood of 23. That basin is still in great shape. We also work on culvert removal and dam removal and culvert replacement projects, mainly with the goal of improving passage for trout to be able to reach colder water, but they have local flood mitigation benefits as well. In Fayston, we helped Friends of the Mad River replace the Lockwood Brook culvert. You can see before it was an 8-foot perched pipe, and it's now a 16-foot wide open bottom culvert, which provides important access to the Green Mountain National Forest for trout and other critters that need that refuge. It also keeps German Flats Road, a really important connector, open and reduces disruption to the community in the case of flooding. We have another culvert replacement project lined up for construction this year on a tributary of the Stevens Branch in Williamstown. And these projects are largely supported by funding for Fish and Wildlife, but they are also putting into place flood resilient infrastructure. So restoration projects like these may not make all of the difference in mitigating flood damages, but the more of them that we can accomplish, the more their impacts will add up to lower costs and less intensive recovery needs at flood events. Such as in 2023, this is a culvert on Blodgett Road in Cabot, where we were working on a replacement project. We received the final design 4 days before that culvert was washed out by the flood. It is now a FEMA project. So clearly it needed to be replaced, and we just got there a little bit late because there are a lot of culverts in this watershed and in this state. So one documented example of a floodplain reconnection project that we've completed that's made a big difference is the Dog River Park in Northfield. After the flooding from Tropical Storm Irene, the town of Northfield acquired and demolished 7 homes on Water Street, much like many communities across the state are doing right now. And the town partnered with Friends of the Winooski River to undertake a project to remove a berm along the river and lower the floodplain elevation to allow the Dog River access to more of its floodplain. This is that same neighborhood on July 10th, 2023. You can see there's water surrounding all of these homes. And the engineers who designed the project recalculated and said that this flood was 6 inches lower than it would have been if we hadn't done the project. And while 6 inches doesn't sound like a lot, these homes only had basement flooding. And 6 inches might be the difference between basement flooding and having to gut your first floor. It also meant that households were not displaced. An army of volunteers did not need to set aside their jobs and responsibilities to respond to a disaster in this neighborhood. The town didn't need to spend huge amounts of time and energy navigating FEMA paperwork again. The whole community was able to bounce back more easily, and that's what we mean by resilience. The cost savings accrued by this project are substantial and durable. And it's an excellent recreation area. So think about that as you're working on these buyout projects. So what happens when the river spreads out across its floodplains? We've talked about how it can slow down and it can drop sediment. And here we are measuring the sediment at Martin Bridge Park in Marshfield in 2023. It averaged a little over 8 inches deep over an area of more than 3.5 acres, which works out to over 3,000 cubic yards of material just in that field, which is more than 200 dump truck loads of sand and silt and everything else that did not travel downstream, where it would have caused more damage by scouring stream banks raising the river level and pounding bridges and culverts. Just downstream in Plainfield, we found that where there were trees along the river, those trees were totally full of trash, as you can see. And again, that's trash that got caught up and stayed there and did not flow down to Montpelier. We had enough trouble here in Montpelier without all of this trash. And here are volunteers with dealer.com with the 6.5 tons of trash that they pulled out of that one floodplain forest area after the 23 flood. So that Martin Bridge Park, which is an open floodplain, and this area in Plainfield that's a forested floodplain, are both in relatively natural, undeveloped conditions. And we can try to restore this type of condition in other places, the way that we did in Northfield. So dams. We have an idea, all of us, I think, have this idea in our mind that dams hold back floodwater, but what they actually do is hold up the stream bed and increase flood elevations in the surrounding area. There are only 3 flood control dams in the watershed, which means 3 of the 100 or so dams in our watershed actually control flooding, and the rest are obsolete industrial dams that are not being maintained. This is the East Calais Mill Dam on the Kingsbury branch of the Winooski, which was one of several that were badly damaged in the 23 flood. So this work is very slow, it's very costly, and it's very complex and interdisciplinary. The resources available to advance this work are wildly inadequate to the need. And so we have to all work together to make the most strategic choices we can when we're thinking about how to manage our rivers and how to help our communities. And that is why we've been helping to lead the Winooski Flood Resilience Collaborative, which is being co-led by the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, Friends of the Winooski River, and a steering committee of amazing people who are bringing their knowledge and resources to our community to help us figure this out. We're going to be doing some river modeling, helping communities define their flood reduction objectives, and trying to help identify smart solutions. So that all sounds kind of dire, but I just want to leave you with a photo of what's possible. This is a dam removal project we completed in Northfield in 2020 with the help of a lot of partners, funders, skilled engineers, and excavators. We restored this stream and valley to natural conditions with all of the benefits that flow from that. And we are very excited to keep doing more.
Thanks, Michelle. That was great. Nice to see so many projects happening all over the watershed. We're going to move to a sub-watershed now with the Friends of the Mad River. So I think we have Julie on the call. We do.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah. Thanks, Allison. Just a heads up, my internet has been a little bit flaky. It's been pretty stable for the last 20 minutes, but if I cut out, just move on to the next speaker and then I'll call back in and we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will. Thanks.
Okay. So thought this was going to happen. It's taking up my full screen when I do that. If there's a way for it not to take up the whole screen when you're in Teams.
That's usually what happens when I share my screen.
Yeah, that's all right. That's right. I've got to work around. No worries. So I'll just jump right in. Thanks, Allison. And my name is Julie Frost. I'm with Friends of the Mad River. I'm the Watershed Project Coordinator. And I think great presentation from Michelle. I think you're going to hear there's some synergy between Friends of the Mad and Friends of the Winooski, and there'll be some a lot of discussion that reinforces some of the great themes that Michelle just shared. Yeah, let me just jump right in. I'm going to share a little bit of background about our organization, and then I'll get into more of the work that we've done and that we continue to do. So our core values, we just hit our 35th year as an organization, and we're doubling down on what we call the learn, conserve, and celebrate at the watershed scale. We approach our mission through a diversity of pathways. I'm going to focus on sharing with you this diversity today. We know that our core values are shared values with our communities and with our residents, and we're really dedicated to working with everyone to create a more resilient and healthy watershed. Still doing okay, or am I frozen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Let's check a couple of times. So you may know us, you may know some of these efforts that these are some of the things over the last decade or so. So after Tropical Storm Irene, we had a 2-year strategic initiative working with across a lot of organizations in the community called Ridge to River, and this resulted in an action framework that guides landowners and stewardship. We've worked with all of our watershed towns on projects such as culvert replacements for aquatic habitat and flood resiliency, as Michelle was talking about, stormwater mitigations like road gullies and rain gardens, and many tree plantings up and down our streams and river. We also have a cohort of 20+ volunteers who monitor 23 sites along the MAD, which gathers critical scientific data. We think this is incredibly important given the warming waters from climate change and increasing development pressures. And a fun fact, I have not yet actually confirmed this, but it's believed that our Mad River Watch and the data set that we have is likely one of the oldest continuous volunteer water monitoring programs in the country. The oldest or one of the oldest, so that's exciting. I'm going to touch on our capacity because this is also really exciting for us. For the first decade, much as what Michelle said, we started as all volunteer. We hired our first executive director in 2014. And what you see here is that we'll have like 200% growth over just a couple of years. This is strategic. We had a strategic visioning exercise in 2024 and decided, what we needed to do to have more impact in large projects and community engagement. So you're going to hear a little bit more about how we're able to do some things now with this expanded capacity. All right, so our core focus, we'll talk about program areas and projects. On the left there, you see these 5 program areas, and I want to keep reinforcing, we really are trying to have such a diversity of things that we offer to serve the community and to engage with the community. That's very important so that we can collaborate with a large spectrum of voices and perspectives and hopefully educate and work with a lot of different people. I'll just point out landowner engagement is what we refer to as working with private landowners, either doing consultation or small projects on their land. And watershed restoration is our phrase, our catchphrase for larger projects, generally with the municipalities or larger private landowners. And so those large projects that are those 4 that are listed there on the right are really what we see as our current projects that are key to implementing more in the ground, in the stream restoration and flood resilience projects now that we have this additional capacity. And so they're either projects that will actually advance specific projects or enable us to just manage a pipeline and manage our capacity. And I'll talk about that later. So getting into some of the details about 2 of our projects, the aquatic organism passage and advancing project development. On the left here, you see an example of a culvert that's perched and undersized. And this is in Warren off of Lincoln Gap Road. So this is one example, much as Michelle mentioned, this is one example of a culvert replacement that we're working on. It's just one of what we have as a master list of high priority culvert projects in the valley. And we're really, reestablishing a close collaboration with our towns because we know that they have priority culvert replacement projects. And we're trying to synergize that and see which are the best ones to move forward with, and continue to identify them, find the funding, and get those replaced. This is in an area where, like Michelle was saying with Lockwood Brook, this is an area where we will provide really amazing habitat for brook trout up into the national forest. So we're excited about pushing this one forward. In the middle pane there, you see, we can actually do field work in the winter, which is good considering the winter that we've had. And this is working with a private landowner who's been really engaged. We did a buffer planting a few years ago, and now we're going back and looking at doing a culvert removal, some buried culverts that are removed. And this is going to be important to be able to reestablish that floodplain connection that we've talked about a lot tonight, as well as potentially improving water quality with phosphorus reduction. And then on the right side, you see examples of collaborating with the towns on road and stormwater projects like ditching and erosion. We have very steep valley walls and a lot of gravel and class 4 roads. And so as Allison was saying at the beginning, the erosive forces of these microbursts in our watershed is really significant. So if we can collaborate and move forward more of these projects with the towns, I think that there'll be a lot of benefit from that. So this is another one of our current very brand new large projects we're so excited about. So we just launched, just hired our nursery coordinator, and you see there on the right is a snapshot of the vision board of the small startup spot that we're going to be using at Luro Farm in Waitsfield, as we're in parallel establishing a permanent home somewhere in the valley. We will be engaging volunteers, we'll be doing local seed collection, eventually growing the scale, the size of the nursery so that we can provide trees and stems and shrubs to our own projects as well as to local landowners. And these will be ecotype specific and flood and climate resilient species. And the last large project that I'll just touch on very quickly is our geodatabase, geospatial database project. It's essentially both a robust project management tool and a warehouse for all the information that we need at our fingertips to plan and implement larger scale projects. We're just building this pipeline, and we're doing a lot of things right now and identifying and scoping things, but we need a place to put that so that we can have that information at our fingertips and move the projects forward, as well as use all that information to then tell the stories about the impact and the benefit that those projects that we've been able to implement have. And I think having this as a geospatial application is just going to be really important, so that we see the overlap, as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, at the watershed scale, and not just as one-off projects isolated. All right, I'm going to talk about community a little bit. As I mentioned, we really try to have a variety of different ways that we're engaging with our community, both with projects, but also with events and education and outreach. So we increased our capacity for this kind of work significantly. We had 24 events in 2025. We partner with libraries and rec groups and schools and landowners and businesses. And again, just trying to think about a lot of diversity of the kinds of things that we're offering here. In this first panel on the left, we have an expert series where we do place-based education for the public. We have a climate and ecology book club. We are also in all of the schools in the watershed, and we expanded this as well. So we are now reaching 600 students and 19 teachers, including service learning opportunities for the kiddos. And I mentioned rec groups. We're doing a lot with rec groups. On the bottom there, you can see one of the events of our series that's called Climate for Climate. So Climb It for Climate. And that's gotten really exciting. And on the top there, you see a plunge event on New Year's Day. And so this is just a really wonderful way to engage with the community and just celebrate this amazing place that we get to call home. And the diversity, again, of all of this is bringing in a lot of different voices and perspectives. That's so important for building a coalition to really think about together how we're going to improve the health of the watershed. And that's all I have. I just invite everyone to check us out more on our website, our events page. If you have ideas and questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time.
Thanks, Julie. That was great. Next up, we have Dan from the Winooski Natural Resource Conservation District. I think we still have you. Possibly.
Yes, for sure.
Yes, we do.
Let me just share my screen and we are ready to go. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for inviting us and letting us present here and talk a little bit about the work that we do. For those of you who don't know the conservation districts, we are a national program. So all U.S. states and territories have conservation districts, and we stem effectively from the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. It was recognized at the time that even though it was a natural disaster, effectively a drought, had people taken better care of their soil, it would not have been as bad as it was. And so the federal government requested that all the states establish these conservation districts, initially just to care for soil health. And so Vermont did. And we were established as a district in 1939. We're one of 14 districts in the state of Vermont. We are the largest of the districts. Our service area covers all of Chittenden and Washington counties, as well as 3 towns in Orange County, Orange, Washington, and Williamstown, and that's because they're largely included in the Winooski Watershed. We also serve about a third of Vermonters, so we're the largest by land area and by population served. We currently have 4 staff members, myself, the district manager, managing kind of day-to-day operations and kind of strategic vision for the district, as well as a conservation specialist who works mostly on natural resources, and then 2 individuals who work largely with farmers, our ag specialists. And we are not a nonprofit. We are actually a unit of government. So we are a kind of strange municipality of sorts, and as a result are governed by elected officials. And so we have 5 board members who are elected, and those are the 5 you can see there. We're always looking for more, so if you're interested in being a part of the district operations, feel free to get in touch with me. While we were established to function mostly on soil health, our scope has been expanded to basically all natural resources. And so we focus on the wise stewardship and sustainable development of natural resources in our service area. So how do we contribute to flood resiliency? We do this a number of different ways. One of the ways that we do this is through the Rethink Runoff and Stream Team program. This is a program that we run in conjunction with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission and a number of what are called the MS4 communities in the Burlington area. These are communities that have well-developed sewer and stormwater systems and a good amount of impervious surface in their towns. And we basically help to promote green stormwater infrastructure in these towns by hosting education events and by building and maintaining green stormwater infrastructure elements. So instead of having stormwater just channeled into these large pipes that then ends up getting dumped to the river, is there a way that we can capture some of this water and sink it into the soil before it gets to the drains at all? And we do this by building and maintaining rain gardens, helping people build and maintain rain barrels for their private residences and things of that nature. We also run a program called Storm Smart, which offers private home assessments with a similar goal of helping people to better manage stormwater on their property. Again, with the attempt to slow and spread and sink that stormwater into the soil before it leaves their property and is destructive on other people's property or destructive on their own property. So basically, one of us will come out to your property, we'll take a walk around with you, and then we'll write up a report detailing some of the actions that you can take to better manage stormwater on your property. It's a completely free program, and we are offering it again this summer. So if you're interested in having an assessment done feel free to reach out to us or Friends of Winooski and Friends of the Mad, who both also offer the same service. We do a lot of tree plantings, as do Friends of the Winooski and Friends of the Mad. One program that we offer is Trees for Streams, which looks to add what we call riparian buffers. So these forested zones along the edges of rivers that help stabilize the banks of those rivers. And if flooding does occur, it kind of slows down the water as it runs through that forest rather than it just having a flat field to run over. And so these are just pictures of us helping a property up in Jericho last summer plant up one of their clearly failing banks of a river on their property. We also do dam removals for all of the reasons that Michelle mentioned. I won't say them again because she did a great job. 2 years ago, we removed the Hansmill Dam in Washington, Vermont, and we've got a dam in Williamstown, the Real Pond Dam, we're hoping to remove this summer. We're studying the potential removal of the Silly Hill Dam in Jericho, and then have a number of other smaller dams in Shelburne and Charlotte that we're looking at potentially removing as well. Again, like Friends of the Mad River and Friends of Winooski, we also do culvert replacements. There are lots and lots of culverts. There's plenty of culvert replacements to go around. We have a culvert replacement coming up this summer again in the town of Washington on Woodchuck Hollow Road. And then we have designs that will be drawn up, and hopefully next summer, a culvert on Maury Road in Washington will be replaced for fish passage and flood resiliency. We don't do this super often, but occasionally we will also do what's called strategic wood addition. And the idea here is to basically drop or fell trees into streams with the idea of adding roughness to the river and floodplain. Basically, if as the water flows through these felled trees, it slows the water down. Sometimes it causes it to jump its banks and to spread out and become less destructive. And the idea is to do this wood addition up high in the watershed where there's not a lot of people and where it doesn't really matter if the river jumps its banks and floods all over a flattened out floodplain forest or a field. And basically reduce the energy of that water before it gets down into the valleys where most of the people are and where much of the infrastructure is that can be damaged. At the district, we also conduct studies of lake watersheds to identify both water quality issues, but also flood resiliency issues. We completed 2 years ago a study of Lake Iroquois up in Heinsberg. The idea of these studies is to come up with a list of potential projects that could improve water quality and flood resiliency in these lake watersheds. And then we're currently working with some consultants on the Sabin Pond watershed in Woodbury and Calais. That's an ongoing project. We are also working on education projects. So as many of you know, Vermont has a large network of private roads. And those private roads are maintained by an army of private construction contractors. Some of them do a great job. Some of them don't always do the best. And the goal of this work, which we're with the Yes Tomorrow Design Build School in Waitsfield and the Lake Champlain Sea Grant, is to try to come up with an education series to help these private earth movers, mom and pop contractors to do the best work that they can, with the hope that that will kind of work its way through the entire watershed. These people are doing work on all these different private roads and driveways throughout the watershed. And if they can do the stormwater infrastructure correctly, that it will have collectively a major impact. And so we've been running this series of educational workshops. We've got one coming up in May. We had one at the end of last year to try to get out the best practices so that they get on the ground. As I said, the district has a whole ag wing, which may not seem initially related to flood resiliency, but I think that there are important crossovers here. When farms flood, in addition to like heavy crop losses, you often also get major nutrient loads into rivers, which can cause pollution events down the line. And so some of the things that we do with farmers, I think, do impact flood resiliency, just not in the like obvious visual damage way. So we help farmers with their nutrient management plan to make sure they don't add excessive nutrients to their fields. We also help farmers with their cover cropping. So if you don't know what a cover crop is, when you harvest your cash crop, say it's corn, your field is effectively bare at that point. If you were to get a big rain event, all that topsoil is going to wash off into the nearest stream or river and cause problems downstream. And so what you do is between cash crops, or feed crops, you plant what's called a cover crop. And it's basically a crop that's there to put roots in the ground and to hold that soil in place until you get your next harvest crop in. And so we help farmers make sure they get their cover crop on between their harvests. We do also directly help farmers who are losing land to the river. This happened 2 years ago, or 3 years ago in the 23 flooding. We had a number of farmers who lost major portions of their farms to the main stem of the Winooski. And so we're working with the USDA to try to basically armor up those banks and prevent those farmers from losing more good arable land so they can continue to grow food. We continue to work with farmers in a variety of programs, mostly in collaboration with the USDA to stabilize their farms and keep them farming. And that's what this kind of general technical assistance is we help them find those programs. We also run a program renting out skidder bridges to help logging roads to be better developed. So if you don't know, loggers most often logging in the wintertime used to just drive their trucks right through streams and rivers, obviously causing problems to those streams and rivers. And so we have a series of bridges that we rent out to loggers so that they can put a temporary bridge over that stream instead of driving right through it. And then finally, so invasive species management, which again doesn't seem necessarily directly connected to flood resiliency, but there is increasing evidence that certain species like Japanese knotweed, which you can see there on the right, when they line riverbanks, don't do as good a job of holding that riverbank in place as, say, a native floodplain forest would. And so the replacement of those giant knotweed stands with native floodplain forest actually is a flood resiliency issue. And so it is something that we work towards when we can. Again, thank you. I don't think we're doing questions now, but I'll take questions whenever we do them. Thank you for letting us present.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Okay, we're moving on to the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission now, and maybe we have two people, Lincoln and Brian, with us tonight.
Yeah, hi folks. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thanks. Thanks all. Hi, I'm Brian Voigt, Program Manager at the Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission. I'm here tonight with my colleague Lincoln Frasca, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of our natural resource planning program activities. First, just a quick bit of background for those of you that don't know about regional planning commissions. We are one of 11 regional commissions in the state of Vermont. We were formed in 1967 and serve all 20 of the municipalities in Washington County and the same 3 municipalities that Dan mentioned in Orange County. We provide a range of services to the 23 towns that we serve, including things like community development, emergency management and hazard mitigation, transportation planning, climate and energy planning, GIS services, and natural resources. And really all of these different areas touch on various aspects of resilience. And we work with the towns, with planning commissions and select boards to develop plans, identify projects, and take them all the way through implementation. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Lincoln Frasca, that's going to talk to us about some of the flood-related work that we do.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, I just want to focus in on one of the major grants that Brian and I work under that's most relevant to tonight's conversation, and that's the Flood Bylaw Updates grant that we received through the Mount Scottney Regional Planning Commission as well as the Vermont DEC. So this work, as you can see, we have a 2-year span for this chunk of money. We hope to see that renewed, but we aren't counting our chickens before we hatch. So thinking about what we learned with the Flood Safety Act timeline, bylaw updates take a long time. You know, we encourage everybody to reach out to us or their relevant regional planning commission sooner rather than later. This grant that we're working under is specific for updating, helping municipalities update their hazard bylaws to meet the National Flood Insurance Program or NFIP standards. And when we're doing that, we're also introducing the Vermont Model No Adverse Impact Standards, which are DEC's, the state's bylaws that also include river corridor bylaws and would be in alignment with Act 121 and the Flood Safety Act that is coming down the line. So this is all part of preparing for FEMA's new flood insurance rate maps that are rolling out slowly. But that is also happening, and we're meeting with towns about all of these things. Municipal plan updates, local hazard mitigation plans also need to be up to date to renew your bylaws or update those. And you see here the least responsive NFIP municipalities. What I take that to mean are our communities that need the most help and they need it first. It might be towns that aren't meeting those NFIP criteria and need to be in order to pass review from FEMA. They might not have zoning, they might not have river corridor protection. So we have to be strategic because we don't have an endless budget here. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so I did want to just kind of give you an overview. Shane mentioned the Emergency Relief Assistance Funding ERAF program as it relates specifically to our region. So there are these 5 criteria that you see on the box in the lower left-hand side of the screen. And the first is NFIP. Thankfully, all of our communities are participating. And then there's these other 4 standards. And if you look at this middle column here, we have these 6 communities that in order to go from that 12.5 state match fund relief to move into the maximum 17.5, they really just need these river corridor standards to be adopted. And we know that in 2028, this will be coming from the state, but we have 2 years of potential flooding before then. We don't know what's going to happen with this program, but we're really urging our communities to take this and see this as an insurance policy. And when we're thinking about a recovery project that's $1 million, and we know that can be much more than that, well, $1 million, the percentage of 7.5 to 17.5, that's a difference of $100,000 that your community could benefit from if you take advantage of this program. Next slide. And you can also, we've linked to the community reports site here. You can look at your individual community report. You don't just have to look at the entire region. So that's really what I want to show here. Next slide, thanks. And yeah, so what have we done and what are we doing with this grant? Really, like I said, those towns without river corridors or zoning regulations are getting the most emails from us, and I have those listed here. And we've been grateful to work with several of these communities to think about what they need to increase their ERAF score or prepare their communities for the next flood. We've hosted a NFIP municipal training that was recorded and had almost 3/4 of our towns participate in that, which led to few assistance that we're working on right now. Over the last 3 years, we've been reviewing the flood hazard bylaws for each of our communities, updating that as they update their bylaws, and making sure that they know if they're not meeting those minimum criteria, what they need to do in the next update in order to meet those. We've also been responding to communities that have asked us to look at, hey, what we do have interim river corridor bylaws, what would it take for us to meet the DEC standards for permanent river corridor bylaws, which I said are included in the model no adverse impact standards. So we're working on that. In map interpretation, the FEMA maps are not out for the Winooski yet, but they are in Orange County. So we've been working with Washington to understand those changes, and several communities have partnered with us to update their local hazard mitigation plans as well over the last few years. Next slide. Yeah, so really just to wrap my portion up, I'll give it back over to Brian, but we do encourage you all to reach out to us. There's a number of services that Brian mentioned, but really helping you prepare for the changes that are coming at the state level, at the national level, and thinking about how, as a region, we can best assist our communities. So you can schedule a consultation with Brian and I at any point. Reach out to us. We have the money. It's here now. So let us help your communities. And I'll pass it over to you, Brian.
Great, thanks, Lincoln. And I'm not sure if we'll be sharing these presentations out, but in any case, for folks that want more information about any of these other resources, do reach out to us, please. So one other thing that we work on that I think is important to mention, and you know, you've heard about all these great projects that the various watershed partners are working on. Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission is the clean water service provider for the Winooski River Basin. What that means, practically speaking, is that we get about $1 million per year to achieve an assigned phosphorus reduction target. And so we've been working this program since about 2023. We've been slowly ramping up our project pipeline. Completed projects, we've really not spent that much money, just a little over $300,000 for about a 23.5 kilogram phosphorus reduction. We've got a number of additional projects in the pipeline to the tune of about $175,000 for another 30-ish kilograms. And then we've got some really big projects on the horizon that are currently in the project development phase and are very much preliminary. Big numbers on both cost and phosphorus reduction. And you might wonder, you know, why I'm bringing this program up in particular. For folks that have worked with funding under this program, you know, we all understand we're threading a pretty small needle here. The priority is phosphorus reduction, but every once in a while we get a project that comes through that sort of intersects both phosphorus reduction and increasing or improving flood resilience. And so one example of that kind of project is in the town of Waitsfield. We spent some project development money to look at a number of different municipal properties. And of the 4 properties we looked at, this one, the Lower Fairgrounds, so right across the river from where Julie and the Friends new planting program will take place, is the Lower Fairgrounds property. So it's about 10 acres, 9.5 acres, with a potential phosphorus reduction of just over 50 kilograms. Likely to be a pretty expensive and complicated project for any number of reasons that I don't have time to discuss right now, but this is one project we're engaged on with the town of Waitsfield. We've got a similar effort in the town of Waterbury with the Randall Meadows project. That one's much larger, 40 acres, with a potential phosphorus reduction of about 100 kilograms, but also a potential price tag of, or at least for our contribution, just over $2 million. You've heard a bunch about culvert replacements. One project I just wanted to highlight that we're working on in the town of Berlin. Again, spent some project development money to work with the town on identifying priority culverts for replacement. This is the project that really bubbled up to the top out of all the potential candidates. It's really pretty interesting because it started out as a culvert replacement, not that simple. You see that there's actually 2 culverts kind of almost stacked on top of one another, but there are also multiple additional stream crossing structures, an old beaver dam, an old stone dam. So in order to get the phosphorus credit for the culvert replacement, we need to actually implement improvements at all of those different stream crossings. So although it's a fairly small sub-watershed, we will be working almost the entire length of that sub-watershed, replacing or restoring some of these structures, producing both a phosphorus reduction benefit, but also improved flood resilience and certainly improved post-flooding conditions at McCarty Road, which is where these culverts are that you see, and quite problematic over time. So with that, I'll stop there in the interest of time and pass it along to Chittenden County.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And yes, last but not least, Darren, we're excited to hear from you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Brian and Lincoln and everyone who's gone before. So I'll keep my section pretty brief because you've heard a lot from everyone else already. And I'll also mention that Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission is another regional planning commission in the Winooski Watershed, but similar to, I'll get to some of this, but a lot of what we do is similar to what Central Vermont has been. So I'm going to focus on some of the things that Brian and Lincoln did not cover. So hopefully my PowerPoint is coming up. Great. So Brian mentioned this a little bit. What is a regional planning commission? We provide staff support and technical assistance to towns and the state. We kind of bridge the gap between the state and the municipalities. We've been around for a little over 50 years, and we are work in pretty much every aspect of government and planning in the state. So all these topic areas, I'll go into a little detail with them, and we'll try to focus in on the things that are relevant to flood resilience tonight. But CCRPC also does a lot of transportation planning, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. I just want to note, geographically, as I mentioned, we're sort of the bottom of the Winooski Watershed, so a lot of our land area is covered by that, but we are more of that, not the headwaters area for the Winooski, but more of the large, wider river areas. So the big inundation flooding happens here. We get a little less erosive flooding from the Winooski until you get way down towards the mouth at Lake Champlain. But we also have actually three other watersheds that are part of our jurisdiction. So there's the Lamoille, the direct to Lake Champlain, so the northern Lake Champlain, and we have a little smattering of the Otter Creek, Little Otter Creek, and Lewis Creek basins. So we're kind of bridging the boundaries between a few of these. And we serve 19 municipalities, some of which are, broken up within those watershed boundaries. So we are also the clean water service provider for the northern Lake Champlain Basin. So everything that Brian just talked about for the Winooski Watershed, we do the same stuff for those areas, basically on the western side of Vermont, facing the lake in Chittenden County. So just wanted to put that geographic context out there for folks. I'll talk a little bit about how our organization specifically is broken up. We have because we are a metropolitan planning organization, we have a large transportation staff that receives a lot of funding from Federal Highway Administration to do transportation planning for the Chittenden County metro area around Burlington. So that's one arm of our organization that kind of was separate originally. They've merged. On the land use side is where we do a lot of flood resilience planning, but both sides are looking at this from the perspective of water quality through the clean water service provider and some of our water quality issues on roads. And then on the land use side, we do natural resources and energy, as well as emergency management and health. And I'm more on the land use side. So while I can talk about the transportation elements, I'm not as well versed in it, but I'll cover some of that. The biggest thing we do, I think, that on our transportation program that helps flood resilience and water quality is our road erosion inventories and helping our municipalities with the municipal roads general permits. So municipalities in Vermont have to comply with this MRGP, which says erosion from roads and runoff from roads has to meet water quality standards and has to not contribute to contamination of our waterways. So one of the ways that we do that is helping towns figure out how to make sure their culverts and road ditches are appropriately sized for the amount of water that they're going to end up carrying, making sure that the roadway surface isn't going to be eroding and adding a bunch of sediment into streams. And the way that we actually do that is these road erosion inventories. So we have a team of interns that goes out every summer that has helped all of our rural municipalities in particular on the dirt and gravel roads assess the condition of these roads, look at those specific areas that may be seeing more erosion and trying to come up with some longer term solutions than just patch the road and move on. So we've been doing that work for probably close to a decade, and we've had a lot of success with it in not only helping reduce erosion and inputs into the watersheds, but also in helping these roads be a little easier to maintain, a little less costly to maintain, and better outcomes for our community members. A lot of the other work that our transportation team does on the slide, a lot of that can have an intersection with flood resilience, but I won't go into detail here because I want to talk about what we do on the land use side as well. So as Brian mentioned and Lincoln mentioned, a lot of our work can involve looking at regulations and comprehensive plans. So all of our municipalities have a comprehensive plan or a town plan or a city plan. We provide a lot of assistance to them in updating that. And when we do, lately we have been focusing a lot on climate resilience and flood resilience given some of the impacts to Vermont lately. Thankfully, in Chittenden County, those impacts of flooding have not been as severe because, again, we have the lower ends of a lot of these watersheds where the flooding is more inundation based, and a lot of our municipalities have really good floodplain regulations, and we haven't had as much historic development in our floodplains. But that doesn't mean we're not vulnerable to them, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be keeping an eye out for them. And especially in our headwaters areas of our rural towns, there is still definite flood threats, particularly, for instance, in Bolton, where Bolton Valley Access Road washes out every year. A lot of the city offices, town offices and settlement areas are in the floodplain, so we're working with them to look at some of the solutions to those issues that they're facing. Same thing with Richmond. The entire village center of Richmond is in the floodplain, and they've had some continued issues there. So in addition to that long-range planning to say how are we going to deal with these issues, we do also help our municipalities administer their floodplain bylaws and make sure that they're compliant with the National Flood Insurance Program, so that all of our community members can maintain their flood insurance, but also so that, as Lincoln covered earlier, they can maintain that ERAF share from the state. Even though a lot of our municipalities have professional planning staff who are very well versed in how to administer these, some of our rural towns don't have that capacity or don't have as much experience dealing with floodplain administration, especially after a flood has occurred. So we will help our zoning administrators do damage assessments to particular properties, make sure that any improvements that get made following a flood are compliant with NFIP standards and are being built back to a higher standard of resilience when they need to be. So that's a little bit of what we do to help our municipalities, but we're also looking at these issues on a wider scale in our regional land use planning. So we're in the process of updating our regional plan, and we've done a really deep dive on climate and flood resilience there. So we encourage you to check that out. It's currently under public comment, so feel free to submit anything there if you are interested and want to comment. In terms of natural resources, Brian mentioned this a little bit, but we help our Dan mentioned this more with the Conservation District, but we have a partnership with them to assist with MS4 permit compliance, so municipal separate storm sewer system, which is what our urban municipalities do to manage stormwater in those developed areas. It's a combination of putting together projects that our municipalities need to do from a more gray infrastructure perspective of pipes in the ground and gravel wetlands and stormwater retention ponds, as well as that landowner assistance in sort of preventing the stormwater from getting into that municipal system to begin with. And as I mentioned, we are the clean water service provider for Basin 5, Northern Lake Champlain, and have a Basin Water Quality Council that supports those non-regulatory efforts to increase and improve water quality. And a few of our team members do a lot with emergency management and health. So as I mentioned earlier, that's responding to emergency events and disasters after they happen, but also planning ahead for the next disaster. So as an example, we are updating our regional hazard mitigation plan in the coming year. We'll be working with all of our municipalities to update their local annexes that are a part of that. So we try to do that on a regional scale, and that includes the local emergency operations plans. So when a flood happens, for example, and not just a flood, but any sort of disaster, but here we're talking about flooding. When that happens, who's in charge? How do we get folks mobilized? And how do we get people the resources they need? And across all of our programs, we have a few things that are, come into play pretty much with any project we do. I'll mention a few specifically. GIS services. So when folks in our towns are looking at updating their town plan, complying with the new flood insurance rate maps that are being updated this next couple of years, we're helping them incorporate that into their plans, into their municipal zoning bylaws, so it's clear when someone goes to develop in a community that, hey, this area is in the floodplain, this area is outside. If you're going to be anywhere in this area, you need to be aware of what's going to happen and what regulations you need to follow. A lot of technical assistance, as I mentioned, working with both our municipalities as well as some of the folks that they interact with and the members of the public and developers and so on. Another key service that we provide to our municipalities is project management and grant writing and grant administration. So even our, well-resourced municipalities sometimes need a little extra capacity to manage special projects, to work with a particular consultant to help get funding for some of the work that they do, which can include something like the River Navigator program that we're going to be collaborating with Central Vermont on. It's part of that Winooski Flood Resilience Roundtable work, where we're working with a few of our communities, Richmond, Bolton, and I want to say Underhill, and we will be looking at a wider region-wide scale look at flood resilience and sort of the flood risk in the area, and also looking at how to sort of implement that locally, and sort of bridging that gap between our municipalities and some of the larger funding sources that they can't often access on their own. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions if my slides will advance. There's a lot more resources on our website. I encourage you to check that out, and these will be available. Happy to send these out too with all the active links.
Thanks, Darren. That was great. And thanks everybody for presenting about all the really important and interesting work that you're all doing. I did see that our colleague Tessa was able to answer some people's questions in the chat. And so she wrote in that, yes, FEMA flood maps are currently being updated statewide. So that was a question, and there was others who mentioned that in their own presentations. And so there's actually a link in the chat where you can see which watersheds and the timeline for when those maps are being updated. And then we also had a question about the mapped infill areas, and so the timeline around mapping the river corridors that are in designated downtown areas. And so Tessa wrote in that that process is still occurring, and there is not a release date yet, as far as we know, for when those maps will be available. And thank you, Tessa, for also putting in the comment and question form. So if you do have a longer question that you want DEC's response on, there is a way to do that through that link, and I can send it out again afterwards. And so you can just check the box that says you want DEC to respond to you. But if there is any questions from our audience members right now, we'd be happy to give that a shot. And if not, that's fine too. We really appreciate you all sticking with us tonight and listening through all the different panelists and speakers that we had on tonight. So huge thanks to you all as well for talking about all the work that you're doing. And yeah, any closing comments or thoughts from anybody? Great. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and have a great evening.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you, Allison.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
organizing.
Thank you.